So good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. Thrilled, as always, to join everyone at noon. Glad that you could join us today. We really enjoy business as usual, and the feedback that we've gotten from you is that you enjoy it as well. So today is going to be no exception. We're thrilled to have Benjamin Smith with us today. I call him Ben, but his full name is Benjamin Schmidt, and we'll talk about him in a minute. So we have muted your microphones, and that's just to try to get the noise out and to be considerate of our guests. And then we also have a chat, and we monitor that. So we're trying to make sure that we have an opportunity to ask questions and have an exchange. This is a conversation, not meant to be a lecture. So I do want to give a shout out to Huntington Bank. If you've been on this call before, you know that Huntington has been with us right from the beginning. I'm blown away that we are at the 6-month mark in terms of COVID, lockdown, working from home, et cetera. And Huntington Bank has been with us the entire journey and providing support to small businesses, navigating through the complexities of the stimulus initiatives, and just being a good friend to the tech community. So I'm gonna jump right in. I'm very excited to bring in a friend and colleague, Ben Schmidt, co-founder and president of RoadBotics. So welcome. Thank you, Ben, for being here. Thanks for taking the time. And I know that you, like all of us, have had just a very interesting journey over the last 6 months. But as Pittsburgh is the place that we like to consider the world for robotics, what better conversation to have than with RoadBotics? So we're going to jump in, and I'm going to say, let's talk about Ben. Let's talk about who is Ben, how did he get to where he is right now, and also how are you holding up? We want to know how you're actually doing. So Ben, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having us, or me, I guess. I liked your introduction with RoadBotics and robotics.
Yeah. One
of the worst parts about the RoadBotics name is that once you say that often enough, you can't do robotics anymore. You end up just saying robotics all the time. It's awful. Absolutely awful. So, overall, I think I'm doing quite well. I'll answer your questions a little bit in reverse. I think this is a really interesting time in the world. So I think it's a curse, right? The may you live in interesting times. Nailed it. I think we're all accomplishing that for sure. So a little bit about myself. So I'm the president and co-founder, one of the co-founders of RoadBotics. RoadBotics is about 4 years old, but before that, I was actually at another startup here in Pittsburgh, Quantera. And then before that, I actually went to, I did a PhD and my undergrad at Pitt, strangely enough, in bioengineering. So I was actually looking at how brain signals sort of interacted and how we could measure those and sort of understand better how different parts of the brain communicated. By the time I was done with my PhD and leaving, I was looking at Quantera, as I think many of the people on the call will recall. Quantera was doing energy price forecasting here in Pittsburgh. It was another startup. We had some backing from General Electric. The interesting part is while I was doing brains in undergrad and grad school, the math was very similar. And so we were applying a lot of the same algorithms and machine learning to price forecasting. And then ended up actually jumping once again, new industry, here to RoadBotics, in which we're looking at sort of payments and pavement distresses and infrastructure using a smartphone camera. So it's been an interesting journey, certainly, over the last several years. I unfortunately can't say I grew up in Pittsburgh. I grew up in New York, but it has definitely become my home. My wife and son, we all live here. Actually, both of my wife's parents and my parents, we've convinced to move out here. So we are certainly huge Pittsburgh fans, and making that known and shown.
And so you are all your team. We're going to talk about RoadBotics, right? We're going to talk about how it started with a grant project, with the hypothesis that can AI and machine learning be used to identify potholes. And we know that potholes are not just part of the tagline of Pittsburgh, it's everywhere. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about that. Is that correct, that assumption, that was the hypothesis? And then tell us more about the origin and journey to date.
Absolutely. So yeah, RoadBotics is a spin out of Carnegie Mellon. So one of my other co-founders, so there were four of us, but one of the others is our chief scientist, Christoph Mertz. And it was really his sort of idea. So he's been at CMU for many years now. And his idea of, smartphones are they're ubiquitous. Everybody's got one. They have incredible sensors on them. They have a lot of processing power. They were looking a lot at like the early autonomous vehicles and sort of the work he was doing. And his idea was all about, can we use smartphones to not, try to understand something about the vehicle, but rather about the infrastructure, the stuff. And so naturally, potholes and sort of cracks come to mind. As we've certainly gone down this journey of learning more and more about pavement and pavement distresses, you come to find that while most people complain about potholes, it's the thing that really, damages your car. You feel them, you get that really pissed off feeling. The really sort of damning part is actually much before that. So small cracks start to form in pavement, water gets in there, and over time that sort of erodes out the surface of the pavement and ends up becoming a pothole. Once you see a pothole, the road is effectively destroyed. You can do a little bit to patch it, but you really need to sort of fully redo it. And so a lot of what RoadBotics does is actually help clients who are governments to better understand their road networks much before that moment, before the pothole. But yeah, so I think from sort of research project at CMU to sort of that commercialization spin out to where we are today has been, a big journey, a big sort of learning curve in a lot of different dimensions. But ultimately it's, I think it's a lot of the promise of sort of looking at university research and then how that can sort of transition into a full-fledged company that is offering services around the world to clients everywhere, and seeing sort of the success of that.
And so is the world really your oyster? I mean, the proliferation of infrastructure is aging in many places, but I don't know enough about outside of the US. But how large is the problem in the US?
So the problem is very large. So infrastructure is one of those, well, again, one of the most interesting pieces that if you look at sort of infrastructure from sort of the normal person's perspective who's not sort of in that industry, infrastructure is really something that you complain about when it's failed, right? So you complain about the pothole, but when you get into work, if we were ever driving into work again, you'd complain about the pothole, but you wouldn't ever sort of say, but like, wow, but all those new roads are amazing, right? So like infrastructure works when it's not noticeable.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is that, yeah, the same claim that the Pittsburgh region has its own self-made reputation for talking about its roads and infrastructure and how sort of poor quality they are. But that theme across the United States is identical. Every single town has the same. Well, you come from Pittsburgh, you should check out the roads here. Everybody's got that kind of mythology around bad infrastructure. The United States certainly does not do very well at it overall. The American Society of Civil Engineers always comes out with a report card, and we don't get very good grades. You probably get grounded for a week or something like that if you brought it home to your parents. And that's the U.S. Internationally, it's very much the same. So I think another sort of myth we have here in the United States that we hear a lot is like, oh, well, in Europe, they take very good care of the roads. Right. But, not really. So it's a huge problem. And the reason for it is that when you think about the size of infrastructure, it's massive. It's massive. It's been built over, in some cases, hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. And so it requires sort of a level of investment and in maintenance and management that we're just not really prepared to provide to the level that I think would eliminate a lot of the complaints. Mm-hmm. And that's largely where we try to come in, is that, RoadBotics is not going to sort of like instantly solve all the world's problems in infrastructure. What we're hoping to do is make it so that it's just a little bit easier to manage, a little bit easier to maintain. And then if we can keep that little bit easier sort of steadily increasing as we make our products better, as we roll out new features, that we can ultimately make a real dent in sort of how infrastructure actually presents to us, that there are fewer potholes, that there's better roads, that they last longer, and that you also feel that in your pocketbook, right? Because if you look at sort of a small town government, really anywhere in the world, a significant portion of their budget, of your tax dollars, go to this, right? Go to repairing, building bridges, fixing guardrails, right? Like it's a big investment that governments have. So if we can just make that even a little bit better, we're all sort of better off by it.
So we've made international news by the sinking of our Port Authority bus was that a pothole? Was that a pothole?
A very big pothole, very, very big. Yes, I think not really our finest moment.
No, and Catherine, who runs the Port Authority, has been on our show twice, and she takes it in good humor and good spirit, and everyone was safe. But I would say that's become sort of like a little bit of our tagline right now.
Absolutely. I mean, it certainly has, I think, our national reputation. When RoadBotics calls on people, several of them know about that. Again, I think, to me, one of the biggest changes here, and if people walk away with nothing else from this conversation, I hope they get a little bit of this, which is, I think by and large, sort of the national and to some extent international sentiment is like, why is this pothole here? How dare they? Why can't they fix it? All the, it's this sort of blaming sort of government for not really being able to keep up with it. I think what is so exciting. So, I mean, today RoadBotics has about like 250 clients, but I personally talked to probably 2 or 3 times that, like sat across from a municipal government official and sort of had these conversations. And the best part about, I think, what we can offer, and I think what's so exciting for myself, for our employees, is that when you sit across from the room from them and you talk to them about, here's a solution that can help you to try to prevent exactly that kind of problem, they are over the moon at the idea for it, right? They're just ecstatic. So this, I think we have this unfair sentiment that like the fact that a pothole exists is somehow like negligence or incompetent. It's
Right.
not. It's such a hard problem. To look at and inspect and constantly be monitoring all of these pieces, it's a massive challenge. And so offering tools that make that a little bit better, I think, are ultimately the way that we'll get better public sector services, better public sector tools, and in our case, better infrastructure. And I think it's really important for us all to remember that. Like, they're not sitting in the municipal building going like, oh, I could fill that pothole, but I don't want to. It's mostly that we don't know that it exists, right? Nobody reported it. Nobody sort of talked about it. Or even in the worst cases, we don't have budget to sort of do the things that are necessary to sort of fix it. And so I do think RoadBotics is helping to sort of change that. And I think we're all very proud that that's where we can hopefully keep pushing sort of everybody towards, is that there are ways that we can make this better. And that we can get something out of it. So I think that's really exciting.
Well, yeah, I mean, it totally is when it comes to safety as well. I mean, there's just lots of pieces in here. Leslie June is asking, are local governments the target customer for your service?
Yes, so we like to think of it as kind of, it's almost like a colloquialism, like a road manager. So there's someone that usually takes taxpayer dollar by and large and applies different types of treatments. So fully reconstructing roads, filling in potholes, etc. By and large, that is a municipal official. So like a head of public works, a streets department. It could be a couple different levels of government. So municipal governments, you can think about like Cranberry Township, Bethel, Mount Lebo. But you can also think like city governments, counties, as well as states. The federal government has some roads that they maintain. They're usually like reservations, national parks, and bases. But one of the most fascinating parts of how infrastructure is funded in the United States is about 80% of it is actually the local level. So this is below states, counties, cities. So most of the sort of like interactions that everyone here has with your own infrastructure is funded at a very, very local level. So it is the city of Pittsburgh, it is Penn Hills, it is a McKeesport that is paving, repairing, and making the decisions about their roads, which is really kind of a fascinating dynamic. It's very sort of distributed in that decision-making process. So that's our customer base.
So, last year, capital is always a big thing for, startups, and it's a big thing for Pittsburgh, particularly because 70% of the money actually that gets invested in Pittsburgh companies comes from outside the region, and you were no exception. That you closed an important round of financing. Can you just talk about that round, or talk about your investor, or any wisdom around that?
Absolutely, yeah, and you are right. We fit right into that pattern. So we finished up our Series A round. It was a $7.5 million round. It was led by a firm called Radical Ventures that's based out of Toronto. So not only were we out of the region, we were out of the country. They're a great firm. They're sort of newer, but their investment thesis is all around really applying AI and sort of like investing in that, especially to sort of technologies like ours that sort of fit into this kind of non-traditional AI, sort of like other adjacent industries. We were fortunate enough, we were actually followed on, so our seed round was led by a firm, Hyperplane. They're based out of Boston. And so the two of them really came in, as well as a lot of our earlier investors also contributed. But for sure, I think that trend continues, and that most of the capital, most of sort of what we will sort of need going into the future as we're looking at sort of, potentially future rounds, will more than likely come from outside the region, just for, the virtue of that's where the capital is at right now. That's where the opportunity is.
Mm-hmm. Well, you got some accolades here that from Kiana, saying she's a huge fan of RoadBotics, worked with them in her last life. Important to know that ongoing maintenance costs a fraction of what it costs to fix what once failed. The challenge is to shift to local government mindset from reactive to proactive. So I think you embodied that.
Absolutely. And that is certainly another huge challenge here, is that one of the reasons we get into a lot of trouble is if you think about repairing or sort of maintaining roads as similar to like a car or any other asset, if you wait until the thing is like completely busted and broken down on the side of the highway, that's when it's going to cost the most money. But If you're getting sort of the regular oil check, et cetera, you'll have, it'll extend further. So moving towards preventative maintenance is really going to be one of the biggest keys here. And again, this is a huge sort of, it's a challenge for really everybody, but when you think about municipal governments, it's a political problem as well. Mm-hmm. It is not sexy or interesting to say that, we have really stellar infrastructure that we are always maintaining. What's interesting is like, we just built a new bridge, or we widened the highway, like things that you can tangibly see and feel. And from the earlier comment, that's part of the problem, right? You don't notice the roads that are in good condition. You notice the roads that are in terrible condition. And some of that is, I think, the mindset that, to really be successful here in sort of changing how infrastructure kind of policy is made, but also sort of the infrastructure that we all interact with, we've got to move towards, or at least sort of draw something that becomes more interesting around the fact that managing and maintaining is critically important to our overall success. We can't just always be rebuilding and expanding, or those are fun and interesting, and you get all the big machines and things, but that's just not how we're going to have long-term success with infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. No, it's great. And just to give a shout out to Dan Gilman, he actually always posts when he's repairing roads and when things are going on. So he does that regularly in terms of communicating across the city. Not sexy, but important. So, exactly. So how about, like you talked earlier about, like you're involved in over 250, if not more, communities, and have partners across, I think, 34 states and maybe 14 countries with some of your newer clients in larger cities. Can you talk about the outcomes? Can you talk about, like, what does it mean, obviously in terms of preventative, but what else does it mean?
So that's a very good question. So I think, a lot of what we offer to our client base is sort of, if you think about it, the simplest way to explain it is just a better understanding, right? So they have more information at their fingertips from which to make, ideally, more informed decisions or better decisions that are based on data. That's really the kind of, that's the tagline for RoadBotics. That's, what we do in a nutshell. The really interesting piece is that, we hadn't anticipated, I don't think, when we started, one of the most important pieces is that if you think about how a government sort of operates on a day-to-day basis, and sort of absent like filling potholes and the main crux of our business, RoadBotics actually becomes a really powerful communication tool. And the reason I say that is that when you think about like filling in a pothole, well, you have a lot of different people that are interacting. So you could have the citizen that's calling to complain about the pothole. You could have the elected officials that are sort of like looking at different ways to fund different parts of the city. You could have contractors. You could have there's all these different components in there. And one of the most powerful thing that RoadBotics offers that's really kind of shifts a lot of the mentality is the communication style. So now we have a set of data that's really the ground truth for infrastructure within that community. And from there, it will inform all their future discussions. So, should we do this or should we do that? Well, let's look at what the data says. Like, should we go here or should we invest in that? Well, let's look at what the data says. And I think that's really one of these very subtle changes that we see a lot within communities that we work with is how communication changes, how sort of what was previously maybe a very politically polarized kind of conversation of like, well, do you want to pave this road or this road?
Right.
Immediately becomes a more objective decision around, oh, well, we're going to do this because if we look at the entire network, clearly this is the best decision. And so I think that's one really powerful aspect of it. The second is that it really starts to unlock a lot of other kind of government interactions. So one of my favorite stories is that when if you've ever seen like the fire hydrants that have the little metal flags on top of them, the reason that they have that is that when a snowplow comes down in the winter, it'll cover over the fire hydrant. So the little flag is so that if the fire department gets called, they can still see where the fire hydrant is to tap into the water. Now, the most interesting part is like on the one hand, you think, wait a minute, I can find like every single Starbucks on the planet on my cell phone, but the fire department in my town can't figure out where the fire hydrants are. Okay, that's one. But then you think about like, well, where did all the fire hydrants come from, right? They were built over 50, 70 years. They were put in different places. Some were removed, some were added. So it's hard to keep track of. And so I think one of the most interesting pieces of like using the data that we have, and we actually just rolled out a new product called Agile Mapper that helps to do this, is actually all about creating these asset maps. So fire hydrants are one, but you can also think about that same problem being around where are all the speed limit signs? Where are all the stop signs? Where are all my guardrails? Where are my traffic lights, my street lights? And so there's just, again, you think about the physical environment that governments operate in, there's just so much stuff out there, and it's hard to keep up with it. It's hard to manage it. It's hard to maintain it. And so we are just trying to offer more and more tools to make that easier and easier. So I think where we started with, let's find cracks and potholes, has now sort of expanded into this more holistic approach around let's help with infrastructure in general. And I think that's kind of this exciting move that we're seeing within our own organization as we are kind of like, wow, I think there's a lot more opportunity here to really help what governments are doing on a day-to-day basis.
So it's interesting. So, obviously I wanted to talk about the pandemic and how that's impacting your operations. So it's a question here from Tina saying, are you hiring? And then there's a question follow up with Anita about, could you use this for park maintenance? I love when people who are listening are thinking about other applications for the companies that we hosted on here. So you went all virtual, right? I mean, you were one of the first that immediately went all virtual, and you remained so. But what's happened? What else is happening in that pandemic period of time? And what do you think about the idea about park maintenance in terms of expansion?
So park maintenance, absolutely. One of the things, so with this Agile Mapper product that we've been talking a lot about is helping with trails, sidewalks, sort of like other pieces there. And then again, with the imagery that we have, also looking at, you can think about like park benches and water fountain, like all the sorts of things that you would find in a park. So really, again, you step way back where we started with potholes, cracks, and really roads has now expanded into sort of infrastructure and really assets in general, physical assets in the world. To the question about pandemic, we've certainly, we went digital pretty quickly. We had the opportunity to sort of shut down our offices that we took advantage of when this all started. At the time, that was super risky, not knowing sort of how long this might last. In retrospect, it's been terrific. I think that, myself and a lot of our employees and colleagues would sort of love to go to an office, but I think with the caveat that, when it's safe to do so and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's certainly been one aspect of it in which sort of quickly transitioning to a remote environment. For me, the biggest change with a remote environment is that I think robotics has gotten to the point now where a lot of our sort of business and interactions are more established. And so I think we can, we were interacting with all those same people for quite a lot of time. And so we created those relationships that I think video chats and things are not a problem. I would definitely say the one that would still make me nervous is like, if I think back like 4 years ago when robotics was starting out, I would be much more nervous about a completely remote environment just because of the pace of a startup at that early phase. That seems difficult. To the sort of like hiring question, so we are bringing in new salespeople as we've been sort of like seeing more and more growth around the country. And so one giant question for us, and I know lots of other organizations have done this, but for us it will be new, is digitally onboarding someone, getting them used to sort of our culture and our people. I think all of those are sort of new things that we're going to work through and learn about. And hopefully be successful at. I think we'll be successful at them, but we'll inevitably screw up. We always do. Usually bounce back though.
So as we wrap up, I want to just say, in terms of Pittsburgh's AI community, what advice do you want to give our economic development leaders in terms of leveraging the capability here to create jobs, to create growth, business growth? So if you had your magic wand and you wanted to say something, do something, what would it be?
I feel that's a loaded question because the obvious one I just want to spit out is capital, right? Because capital will drive all the startup pieces. But I would actually go one step beyond that and have a slightly more subtle answer, which would be one of the things that I found successful with robotics, and I think where we've really sort of levered the idea of like incredibly advanced technology married to an industry that maybe hasn't seen that before, would be more about trying to connect those kinds of dots. So not AI interacting with other advanced technology companies, but rather AI companies or interested parties interacting with industries that don't have AI in them and trying to understand, is there some way to bridge that gap? And so trying to create opportunities to network outside AI. Because I think one problem that we've found in our own groups, but also just kind of, I think, our own experience and how this has worked, is that AI can become a very like insular sort of group in which you're sort of constantly chasing like, what's the new neural network structure? What's the new, but I think as a business, as like a economic development sort of oriented thing, I think the absolute most critical piece is to actually get completely outside of all of that. Someone who has no idea what a neural network is, ask them what they're doing on a daily basis, and then sort of try to connect the dots on like, maybe there's an opportunity to take something that over there is really advanced and apply it to something that is a core problem that might have it. And so to me, I think that's all about application focuses. I think there's just so many more places to apply this kind of technology sort of across industries, across the world, all that kind of stuff. It's just a matter of trying to find someone who knows both sections and get those connected. So that'd be my view.
So, that's great. That's a great reminder. And that's what we try to do at the Tech Council, trying to get all these different kind of market sectors to be connected, particularly those who are working on innovation and inside tech. So I think that one thing I do know about you, that since the pandemic, I think that you got a smoker in your yard.
Yep.
So
Brisket,
what's your favorite?
Ribs, chicken. Oh, brisket. Absolutely. Brisket. Sorry.
Brisket.
No contest. Although I have to say chicken is much faster and also comes out really well.
So as you can tell, another rock star that's sitting right in our region. He may be working from home, but he's working on big stuff, solving problems. check out RoadBotics. You can find Benjamin Schmidt on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to him, and anything. He's very accessible, and he's very interested in all things Pittsburgh, even though he has adopted this as his hometown. So on that note, I am gonna sign off, but we have a great week ahead. I mean, on Thursday, we have Paul Mango, who is at the Health and Human Services, working on Project Warp Speed. Don't miss that. We have our Athena winner at the end of the week. It's just sort of nonstop. We're here to serve all of you. This is Audrey Russo signing off. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.